Hello everyone, this is Katie Colleen here. Welcome back Colleen Clan, or if you're new, then come join the family. Today I'm going to be showing you how I make fabric wheel covers for my wheelchair. So if you are new to my channel, hello, I make mobility aid decorations. And it's taken some time, but I feel like I have a really good process for making forearm crutch covers. And I can make a pair of forearm crutch covers in about 30 minutes. And I'm using my wheelchair a lot more now, and I will be using my wheelchair a whole lot more in the future as well. So I am really trying to pin down a good method to make something that is like what I had for crutch covers, but for my wheelchair. So this is going to be kind of a first draft design idea for making fabric wheel covers, but the goal is to make something that I can make very quickly so I could make a new decoration for every cosplay costume I make, and I make a lot of cosplays. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's start with the pattern. Now I'm really fortunate to have a wheelchair that has pop-off wheels, and this makes patterning really easy. So I'm just going to pop off one of the wheels off of my wheelchair, and I'm gonna lay that on top of this cotton fabric that I'm using for patterning. And then I can just take a pen and just trace around the inside of the push rim. This is just a really easy way to get that perfect circle. Now, if you don't have pop-off wheels, no worries. You can always just measure the diameter of your push rims and then transfer that circle onto your pattern. So now with the wheel cover sketched out, I can get into some more detailed patterning. So this wheel cover is actually supposed to look like a Pokeball. That was the whole idea behind the design, is I wanted to make Pokeball wheel covers. So I'm going to be splitting up our pattern into a few different pieces for the Pokeball. Now, something you're gonna notice is I'm not adding seam allowance to that outside circumference. You don't want the wheel covers to be exactly the diameter of your push rims. If you do that, then the wheel cover is gonna kind of get in the way of pushing, and it's gonna be much harder to do all the little connections. So now I'm gonna get out my fabric and we're gonna make the real thing. So these are all satin-like fabrics, and the nice thing about these wheel covers is it's not super imperative that you use a certain type of fabric. I've made these out of stretch fabrics and it's worked fine, and I've made them out of non-stretch and it's worked fine. So now I got all my little Pokeball pieces cut out, and I'm going to sew these all together. So I am sewing the red half of our Pokeball to that black center stripe, and then sewing that to the white bottom half of the Pokeball. And I'm just using a straight stitch on my sewing machine for this. Now, the thing with these types of fabrics is they fray a whole lot and it gets really messy and it looks awful. So I'm actually also going to run this through my serger just to keep things clean. I'm also going to do a little top stitch as well. The top stitch just, I think, really cleans it up and makes it look quite nice. So a little straight stitch along the top, and we have our Pokeball. You'll notice that these wheel covers are like really thin and flimsy. So we are going to have to add some sort of stiffening layer so that these will hold themselves up while they are attached to the wheel. So I decided to use felt. I like to use felt because it's a really good thickness for wheel covers. You can get felt pretty much anywhere. You don't have to go to a specialty fabric store to get it. So I'm just taking our wheel cover and I'm using that as our pattern to cut out the felt layer. And then I'm also going to cut out a lining layer. So I'm taking some extra black satin fabric and I'm cutting that out as well. So first I would like to sew our Pokeball design layer to the felt layer. I'm just sewing the outside perimeter and connecting those two layers so that they act as one. And you can see that our wheel cover holds itself up quite a bit better now with that stiffening layer. But how are we actually going to attach it to the wheel? So my wheelchair has 6 little connections where the wheel connects to the push rim. And this is where we are going to be connecting our wheel covers. So we're going to have to make a few little strips of fabric that we can have attach around those connections and then back to our wheel cover. Once I have a good length for our little connector strips, now I can start making my own strips. Now this is part of this wheel cover design that I definitely want to change in the future. It took a long time to make all of my own connector strips out of fabric. I think in the future I would like to use either a ribbon, maybe a pre-made bias, or elastic straps. There are a lot of pre-made strips of fabric out there, but I just decided I needed to make all of my own little strips out of my scrap fabric. So first off, I'm cutting a whole bunch of little rectangles. There are 6 connector pieces on each wheel, so I will need 12 little connector straps. So I'm going to fold each of these rectangles in half and sew one side. This makes little tubes. And then when we flip these tubes inside out, we no longer have our rough fraying edges. So with that done, I'm just going to fold in those ends of the tube. I'm just doing a top stitch around the perimeter so everything lays flat and it seals up those rough ends. And now we have a little connector strip that has no ugly fraying edges showing. It's all very smooth and it is the right length for what we need for our wheel covers. So let's figure out where each of these connection strips need to attach. I'm laying down our lining underneath my wheelchair wheel, and I'm taking a tailor's chalk and just marking where each of those connections are. And it's just a little fabric sandwich that we have going on here. We have the design layer, the lining, and all our little connector pieces are just sandwiched inside. With that done, let's actually sew this all together. I'm sewing around the outside perimeter of our fabric sandwich thing, and I am leaving a few inches left so I can flip this inside out. Another thing I need to remember to do is clip the corners. So because this is a circle, it is hard to get that perfect circular shape when you have this many layers of fabric sewn together. So I'm just clipping that outside seam allowance area, and this helps the fabric fold over itself when you have this flipped inside out, and you can get a better circle shape. I'm also going to give this a little top stitch. This just is going to look a lot nicer and it helps hold all those layers in place. Okay, so let's throw this wheel cover back on the wheel again. And now I'm going to kind of figure out where our connector pieces need to reconnect back onto the cover. This will give me a good idea of where I need to put the snap pieces so we can get a nice tight fit. Now, as far as connecting these pieces back to the wheel cover, I'm using sew-on snaps. So I'm actually hand sewing all of these snaps onto the wheel cover. The top half of our snap goes onto our little connector piece, and then the other half of our snap goes onto the back of the wheel cover. This is another point in the design process that I think I'll probably change in the future. It actually took quite a bit of time to hand sew all 12 of these snaps on. I'm thinking in the future I might use buttons or some other method to attach it. So with all those snaps sewn on, you can see how our wheel cover just snaps around those connections and then back onto the wheel cover. And now that we have a nice tight fit over our wheel, I am finally gonna fix up that center circle piece of the wheel cover. So I'm gonna be cutting a pretty big hole in the center here. And that's because when I use the pop-off wheels, I need to have enough space that I can fit my fingers in and wrap them around the spokes. This gives me something to hold on to pull the wheel off. Okay, so now how are we gonna finish up this rough little section on the inside? So I'm cutting out more strips of bias from our black satin. Next, I'm folding those bias strips in half and sewing the edge. And this little bias strip is going to attach around that inside circle and clean it up a bit. So I am sewing down our little bias circle onto the inside circle of our Pokeball. And then I also want to have a nice finished seam on the inside lining as well. So after I've sewn that little bias strip, I'm going to flip it to the inside of the wheel cover and top stitch it down again. This means that we now have our folded edge on the inside and everything is clean, and then our outside edge of the wheel cover also has nice clean seams. So if you'd like to stick around on my channel, you can kind of see any future renditions of this design as I play around with a good method for making wheel covers for my costumes. Overall, this is not a bad method. It just took me a lot of time to make it, and I don't think I want to spend that much time on each wheel cover that I make. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section down below, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye!